everybody, it's Courtney and I'm back here with another design team project for Not Too Shabby. Today I'm going to be using the Get Our Nails Done stamp set, and we're not going to be creating a one-layer card, but we are going to be doing quite a bit of masking. So what I typically do if I'm not sure about placement is I take my card panel and use my stamp positioner and place all of my masks down, so that way I can see which images I want to be in front of another, how far back I need to put things, how far over to the side I need to stamp things. I'll be honest, most of the time I just go in with my acrylic block and start stamping and hope for the best. But for this many images, I find that this is the easiest way to do things. And then I can kind of know where I need to place my stamps. So you'll see I have everything placed or stuck down here, and realized that this little jar of cotton balls was way too far back. So I was able to adjust that before I actually stamped out the image itself. Next, I'll figure out which images, or which image in this case, is in the very front of everything else. I'll line that stamp up directly over my mask, then remove whatever masks I need to remove in order to get the full image. Go ahead and stamp that out, and I'm using Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because we will be doing Copic Coloring. And then I'll go ahead and mask that out again. I'll also place that one mask for that image that was behind it, or that will be behind it, just again to get my placement down. Next, I will take a look at what other images are going to be in the second row, and again just place those stamps directly over those images. Pick up my Misty Door, pick them up with my Misty Door, and then remove whatever masks I need to remove in order to get the full images. You'll see that I don't remove all of the masks if I don't need to, just because I'm lazy. So I'm using my scissors here just because I am trying to maintain as much stick to these images or to these masks as possible. The more you stick them down and the more you lift them up, the less sticky they become, and I know I'm going to be doing some ink blending, so I'm just using the corner of my scissors to pick those up. Went ahead and stamped out my next row of images here, and I'm going to speed things up a little bit because I'm basically doing the same thing over and over, but you can kind of get an idea of how I'm building up my little scene here. I went ahead and masked out those two images, and again placed the other masks roughly where I wanted my images to be. They're not going to be exactly where I had them to begin with, but I kind of remember how I had them placed. Go ahead and take the next row of stamps here for the next, I guess the next row behind everything, and pick those up with my Misty Door, again picking up all the other masks that I don't need there, keeping the masks on for the images that I've already stamped out. And then I'll go ahead and stamp those down and mask those out once again. I didn't bother to take the remaining masks for the final row, just because that's all I really had left at this point. So I pretty much knew where I needed everything to be. I'll go ahead and mask these out, and I'm kind of being careful, making sure that my masks are lined up perfectly. Usually if I'm just doing stamping and no ink blending in the background, I'm not worried about my masks being absolutely perfect. But you'll see there, the one way over to the right is kind of crooked. I will fix that before we do the ink blending, because once you do the ink blending, you'll get like a white outline around your images that you can fill in with a Copic marker, but sometimes it's hard to match up the color of the Distress ink or Distress Oxide ink that you're using. So stamping out those final two images, masking those out, and then we'll move on to the ink blending. And I'm going to use a piece, or two pieces actually, of Post-it note tape to mask out the bottom portion of my card, because I don't want that ink blending to be there at all. I just want it to be towards the top. And I ended up using two pieces just because I didn't trust myself to not go beyond that first piece. Starting off with Stormy Sky and just using that right directly behind the images. I'm not taking that up very far. And then I'll use the tumbled glass to blend that out a little bit. And then I'm going to blend that out basically to white. So the top portion of the card panel will pretty much remain white. And how I do that is I go in sections. I work from the bottom all the way up. There may be a teeny tiny bit of color, but it won't be too noticeable, and this way you'll get a good blend. Went ahead and carefully removed all of my masks, just keeping in mind that the Distress Oxide inks do stay wet a little bit longer, so taking up your masks if they are still tacky, and to be honest with you, they're not really all that tacky at this point, you might rip your paper because this Distress Oxide inks do stay wet. So the bottle that's kind of spilling over here, I apparently didn't mask that all that great. The bottom of the bottle didn't stamp out, so I just took a Copic Safe pen to fill that area in, and we'll move on to the Copic coloring. So I'm going to start off with my cool grays, and I use these a lot throughout the card. I'm going to start with the little clippers, and I'm going right in with the darkest color just because I find that the cool gray markers do blend very easily, so I don't feel the need to get the paper saturated to begin with. Just concentrating the shadows being pretty much where one piece of it lays over another. I don't know the technical term for the pieces of this particular item, but I'm just basically randomly picking areas to put my shading. Obviously, there are going to be shadows in obvious places, like where that little nail or whatever that is. There's going to be a shadow underneath that. But other than that, I pretty much just picked random areas. For the cotton balls, I want these to appear white. So I'm just going to be doing a little bit of shading with the C3, C1, and my colorless blender. So first I'm going to add my shadows for the cotton balls that are laying underneath another. And then I'm going to do a little bit of shading on either side of each of the cotton balls because these would be round objects. The jar is also a round object, so you'll see on the outer portion of the jar, I'm actually putting a little bit more shading than I am on the inside portion, if that makes any sense. Blending that out a little bit with the C1, leaving some white areas, and I'll quickly go over those white areas with my colorless blender just to get rid of those flick lines from that C1. I wanted to create some of the labels on the nail polishes I wanted them to be white as well. So I'm using that same C3 and C1, and I'm just adding a little bit of shading on either side of the label because the bottles are round objects, so that would create a center highlight. Flicking that out a little bit with the C1, and right now they clearly look gray, but they won't. Once everything is colored, they will appear to be white. Going in with the C7 again, and I'm going to fill in the areas that I want to appear to be black. So for this top, I guess, top of the nail polish, I want just the, I guess, bands, I don't know what there are, to be black, and I'm concentrating my center being the highlight. Same thing for the tops that I'm coloring completely black. I'm just using, well, I'm using all four colors, but I'm using the C1 very, very sparingly to create that center highlight. Blending that out each time, C7, C5, C3, and then the C1, again, very, very sparingly. You want to make sure that you are coloring your white objects or what you want to appear to be white first before you go in with your reds and your dark pinks and things like that, because if you happen to touch those areas even a teeny tiny bit with just the tip of your marker with like a C1 or a C3, you're going to drag that color out and it's going to be nearly impossible to get it off. So I always color my white objects first. So next we'll move on to the nail polish. So I'm going to start off with this one that's kind of spilling out, and I'm going to cover up the entire area with my lightest color, and this is pretty much just to get the paper saturated to make my blending a little bit easier. Next I'll go in with the darkest color, and for the bottle I am creating a little bit of shading towards the bottom or where it would be closest to the table, I guess. And where that nail file is hanging over it, that would also create a shadow. Around the top portion of the bottle of where, I guess, the spout maybe I don't know. And then I'm just going to create some shading on that little spill. Pretty much where it's indented in and out is where I'm going to create my shading. Blending that out a little bit further with the R46, going over those same areas and just extending those out a little bit. Next, going in with my lightest midtone, doing that same thing and just leaving a little bit of a highlight for that R22, which blends very nicely with the R27, but it's clearly more of a pink than it is a red. But you want to make sure that you are using a highlight, or else you're not going to get the contrast. If I didn't use this R22, you wouldn't have had much contrast at all. You can kind of see that it just looks red. So once you add that highlight color, that's where you're going to get that pop of color. Moving on to the next nail polish bottle, and I'm speeding everything up here because it's pretty repetitive. Leaving a center highlight for each one of these bottles. I'm pretty much just showing you all of the coloring so that you can get the color combinations that I used. I used a lot of R and RV markers, and I think I used a V combination for one of the bottles as well. Some of the bottles I'm coloring around the label and leaving the label white. Some of them I'm coloring the top of the bottle as well, and others obviously are going to appear to be black. Some of them I'm just coloring right over the label because some nail polishes have the clear label on them. Most of them do, actually. So again, for the top as well as the bottle, just leaving the center highlight. Just be careful with the RV markers. They tend to, especially when you get to the lightest color, they tend to pick up a lot of the dark color that you've already laid down. So you kind of want to move quickly with the RV markers to kind of prevent that from happening. Just keep in mind that the lighter the color is, the more the colorless blender is in it. That's how I think of it anyway. And you know what the colorless blender does, it picks up color. So you'll just want to be super careful with those light colors. Missed a few areas here for the black, so I'm going in with the C7, C5, and C3 and adding very carefully the bottom of this bottle to be white with that C3 and C1, being careful not to touch that red. Next, I'm going to be using some BG markers for this cotton ball jar here, going in with my lightest color to map out those darkest areas, which are going to be on either side of the jar and underneath the lid and that little handle or the top of the lid. Going in with the BG13 and using this pretty sparingly because it is such a bright color, just going on either side, blending that out with the BG11, and then finally covering up the entire thing with the BG10, including going right over the little cotton balls, because if this was like a bluish jar, they would appear to have a bluish tint to them. Just doing the outer portion of this little nail file here with some YG and G markers, and that finishes up the coloring. Just going to add a few white gel pen details here, reflections on the jars as well as the cotton ball jar as well. Let this dry for a minute or two, and I'm going to take my T-square ruler and a pencil. I'm going to lightly draw a line right below my images, and some of the images kind of hang below this line. That's okay, I kind of want it to. Now we all know what partial die cutting is, but I don't have dies for all these, nor would I want to sit there and die cut that many dies out at once. So I'm going to fussy cut. I'm going to go right below that pencil line and right around the images that are kind of hanging below the pencil line. You'll see that I'm pretty much keeping my scissors straight and moving the paper, and I'm cutting off excess paper as I go because I don't want this to get in my way. Sometimes when it gets in your way, you tend to fold the paper a little bit too much, and then once you fold it, you can't get rid of those crease lines. So just kind of cut away whatever is not needed as you go along. So next, now that I have that, I'm going to take a piece of black cardstock, and this is cut down to just slightly smaller than an A2 size card. So I'm also going to take my main card panel and cut that down as well. I wasn't sure which side I wanted to take what off of, so I kind of played around with this a little bit and ultimately just decided to take it off that one side and then just a little bit off the top. Line that up onto my black cardstock and realized that the black cardstock was just a little bit too big, so I had to take a sliver off of that as well. Lined that up, and I'm going to be using a sentiment from the Spa Day stamp set, also by Not Too Shabby, and it says tough as nails, so it's perfect for this stamp set. Going to be stamping this in the bottom left-hand corner of the black panel, treating that with my anti-static tool, stamping that out with Versamark ink, and I'll sprinkle on some white embossing powder and heat set that. This way it'll really pop off the page. If you have any of that residue from the anti-static tool, once your embossing powder is cooled down, you can just take your hand and kind of wipe that away to make it truly black again. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere my black panel flat down to a top folding white A2 size note card with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue, just leaving a very small border around the edges of my card panel. Then I couldn't decide whether I wanted to lay my main panel down flat or whether I wanted to pop it up. Ultimately decided to pop this up. So I'm using a whole lot of Scotch foam tape and adhering that to the back of the card, including those little tiny pieces that are kind of hanging down. Went ahead and removed my backing here and popped that right directly over my black cardstock there. And then I'm taking some Dream Drops, and this is Cloud 9. It's white, but it's iridescent, and I'm kind of obsessed with these. I typically just will plop on 3 or 5 of them. I couldn't stop. So I added a whole lot more than I normally do. And then I added a little bit of shimmer with my Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen. That is the card for today, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by. Don't forget to check out Not Too Shabby and use that discount code. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.